Hello, everyone. My name is Tanisha Mobley, and I will be providing you guys with an overview of the Heutink article regarding impaired face perception and recognition after a stroke. So, within this article, researchers take the case of a specific individual who is a 62-year-old female who is right-handed and has suffered a ischemic stroke, basically where fatty clots block the blood vessels in the brain, specifically occurring on the right hemisphere of the occipital lobe and the middle of the temporal lobe. So basically, they take this one area of JS's stroke history and they want to figure out why she is now experiencing impaired face perception and face recognition. So they conducted many preliminary studies that would be biologically based, specifically introducing a structural MRI, which is where they found the lesions on her right hemisphere. And they conducted a many mental state examination, which will test for cognitive impairment, where she scored... It was a 30-point measurement tool, and she scored a 29, which basically means that there's little to no impairment. Also, they conducted a visual object and space perception battery, which suggests that she had mild integrative agnosia or inability to interpret sensations as a reaction to stimuli. They also did the feast test, in which she scored a 32 and 8 points below the actual cutoff for a normal or for normal perception during this test, which indicates that she has impaired ability to recognize facial expressions caused from emotion. Also, on the Benton test of facial recognition, she was unable to accurately understand or interpret faces, the test in which she scored an 18. Along the course of her preliminary examinations, she also did the Sahara color plate test. And within the PowerPoint, there is a picture of what that actually is. This test will measure for color perception, so regarding red-green colors, and whether or not someone is deficient in going ahead to understand those colors. So based on that, this study used JS as a client. So she was the dependent variable, and then they go ahead and use 3 control participants, which are the independent variables. So JS was the person who was dependent upon the stroke occurring, that she now faces face recognition and face perception impairments, whereas the independent variables of the control participants do not face any of those issues. They have normal functioning brains, and they are not going to be given a stroke to replicate the issues that JS is now facing. So within the experiment, the researchers used 60 images, 30 of which were close relative familial ties, where JS as well as the control participants separately had an emotional tie to the family. The next was 15 that were celebrity images and 15 that were unfamiliar stranger pictures. Of those, JS had more difficulty identifying familiar faces, where she actually had I think it was 47%, a 49% accuracy rate in going ahead and identifying familiar faces, close relatives, where she had an emotional connection to, whereas the control group had a 97% accuracy rate in identifying those peoples. Same thing with the celebrities. JS recorded a 76% accuracy rating to the control's 99%. And with unfamiliar faces, JS actually recorded a 96% accuracy rating, whereas the controls recorded a 99% accuracy rating. So based on the research, JS only had issues identifying or recognizing familiar faces. And later in the research, we learned as a result of an emotional connection. So as we go along, so as I explained, they use a system, or they use CSRs, which are give me one second. Skin conductance responses. So basically the electrodes or electricity that is within your skin, they go ahead and test for how the CSRs respond to the stimuli of the pictures. Specifically, that's how they got their accuracy rating. They would read the CSRs and how they go ahead and relate to the results of the controls versus the results of JS. Another dependent variable would be the CSRs. So the CSRs are being given the stimuli, which are the photographs, to go ahead and elicit a response. Whereas the photographs, independent variable, are not being given anything. They're going to be what they're going to be within the research or within the experiment, with no additional information given. They're just that. As we discussed before, the photos are given within a 12-second span. So the first, it begins with a warning sign that says, okay, this picture is about to come up. The picture is presented, or the stimuli is presented, and then they get a question mark which says you can now make a response. If they are familiar with the face, they can recognize the face, they'll press yes. If they do not, they'll press no. With that, the researchers explained to the participants that they did not have to rush to make their to provide their responses to alleviate any issues with validity going forward, and to also have a baseline level for their research trials moving forward, which there were 60 of them for the 60 photos that were involved. So as we continue, the researchers, after they collected all their information, as I discussed before, the accuracy ratings and all that, they decide to pick out 3 specific disorders that are primarily based on face recognition and face perception impairment. And forgive me, these are very difficult to pronounce, but prosopagnosia, Capgras delusion, and prosopometamorphosis. Needless to say, the last condition that I expressed, they felt was the best diagnosis for her, being as though during this condition, there would be impaired facial recognition as a result of perceptual distortions that are only exclusive to the face, which is something that has occurred with JS, but specifically relating to family where she had an emotional connection to. So close relatives, her grandkids, her children, sisters and brothers, and things of that nature. So anybody that she had a close familial emotional relationship with, she had an issue with face perception. She felt as though her grandkids looked repulsive. One might have looked bigger and looked really yellow and tan, specifically with the face. And like I said, they connected that with being an emotional connection. They did this by also bringing in the example of Hitler and Osama bin Laden. So when presented with those two pictures, JS had reported that those were lookalikes of the original people, when in fact they were they were pictures of the real people. And they said that it might have been also because those two people were connected to emotional events in U.S. history. So, with all of that being said, this article was easier to understand once you read through it fully. Some of the strengths were that it was very detailed regarding the physical and biological brain damage that JS occurred, and how it was specific to the concluded diagnosis that the researchers provided to her. JS was willing to participate. It's always easier when you have a subject who is willing to engage in the different research experiments that you're going to go ahead and explain. And also they did a lot of preliminary studies and tests prior to the experiment being conducted. So they did a lot of research beforehand to get an understanding of what her full scope of the diagnosis or full scope of her damage to the brain was. A few weaknesses would be that it was a very small experiment group in whole. So the participant pool was three control individuals and JS. Of the three control individuals, only two were sustained. The third had callous skin and was unable, and once the stimuli was produced, she had a very low minimum, if any, rise in her CSR reading. So they had to neglect her data from the research in whole. Also, they test for individual issues within this study rather than to accommodate a larger population. Although they got a lot of great research, if this were to happen again, I think they didn't use enough variety in the amount of participants they used to try to get a broader overview of what could possibly be an extended diagnosis or extended research. And they don't really explain how the participants were how they were selected for this study, which is an issue that I would like to have known, besides the fact that they were trying to get females who were right-handed within the same age group as JS. It's a little difficult to understand how those people were chosen, whether it was chosen by word of mouth and just brought people over, whether it was a random selection of people who were surveyed and participated that way, and also the length and age that they chose was a little odd to me. They had someone who was 48, someone who's 54 and 58, and then JS who was 62. So they used a range of ages, and I'm not sure if that would have played a part in the overall results that they received. Specific suggestions on how to improve the research design. As I already said, I would make the participant pool, experimental group, control group, I would make that a little bit bigger just to have a variety of research. That way I can test or increase my validity and my reliability regarding this experiment. But other than that, that was my overview. I also included a PowerPoint if you guys wanted to review. It's very short and it's just going to bullet point all the items that I went over. All right. Thank you.